Hello everyone, and in this video we are going to discuss the 10th round of the Chess Olympiad 2022. In the 9th round, Gukesh drawn his game against Shakriya Mamedyarov, and basically India to draw the game against Azerbaijan with a score of 2-2. So it's a draw. And today we have India 2 versus Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan consists of very young players and very talented players. And there was a question before starting the tournament asked by Magnus Carlsen, who seems to win the chess Olympiad? Which team seems to win the chess Olympiad? So he replied, Uzbekistan can be one, and India 2 can be a one. And definitely USA was also one, but yeah, USA is currently very much behind. So currently Uzbekistan and India 2 is performing very well in the chess Olympiad and likely to win the tournament. So we are going to discuss the game between the most awaited game, Gukesh versus Nodirbek Abdusattorov. Nodirbek Abdusattorov is the rapid chess champion of 2022, I suppose. Gukesh 8.5 out of 9, no introduction required. Another big Abdusattorov, one of the greatest talent. I would say his plays are just incredible. So it's going to be very much fun to analyze these games. So let's quickly jump into the game. So playing with the white pieces, Gukesh starts out the game with 1d4, and Nodirbek Abdusattorov replied with knight to f6, c4, e6, knight f3. So we have d5, the Queen's Gambit decline variation. Queen's Gambit till now we don't know whether he will capture the pawn or not. So after d5 we have knight to c3 by white, bishop to b4, and it's pretty standard Ragozin defense where black develops the bishop to b4, and here Gukesh decides to play queen to a4 check, very standard. Queen to a4 check. It looks like bishop is attacked, the king is attacked, so the only move for black is to play knight to c6. It's a fourth move. And after knight c6, many of you are thinking, why white simply developed his queen too early? Is it not said that we should first develop our minor pieces before developing a queen? Yes guys, you are right, but the reason white developed its queen early in the game is, after playing queen a4 check, you can already sense that black is forced to play knight c6. And after playing knight c6, usually in the queen's gambit position, black keeps the pawn to c6 or c5. But as we played queen a4 check and knight c6, it basically blocks the c7 pawn. And nowadays, these moves, these lines is very trending. So queen a4 check is a very standard common theory. Knight c6, and here we have e3 by white. So white generally puts his dark square bishop to d2, covering all the dark squares, and it's pretty fine position for white. Short castle by black, bishop to d2, a5 by black. Defending the bishop, a3, bishop into c3. Also, you can also go back with the bishop to d6, but still keep the game simple. Here we simply have bishop into c3, bishop into c3, and here we have knight to e7 by black. Definitely black wants to push his pawn to c6 or even perhaps to c5, and there could be some good square for the knight, like perhaps the knight can come to g6 and the king becomes much safer. So after knight e7 we have queen to c2 by white. So basically the queen work on a4 have been completed. Now the queen have came to c2. The reason white played queen to c2 in this position is because after playing queen c2 you can already sense that white queen covers a lot many squares. So it's a pretty good square for the queen. b6 by black. Black wants to develop the bishop to b7 or perhaps to a6, creating pressure on c5 pawn, c4 pawn. b3 by white. Yeah, definitely keeping very cement pawn structure. If black captures the pawn, white can recapture the pawn with the pawn, and it also makes a square for the bishop to go on b2. In some cases, there have been some chances that black can perhaps play knight e4, hitting the bishop. Now the bishop is having square for come to b2. So after b3, we have bishop to a6 by black, putting pressure on the pawn on c4, a4. So slowly, white first played a3, b3 and here a4. And the reason white played a4 in this position is because white really wants to stop this a4 threat, because in this position a4 is already very deadly, because a4 attacks the b3 pawn, and if we try to capture this pawn a4, we lose our c4 pawn eventually. So that's the reason white played a4. And there is a very deep reason of playing a4, as black is having no longer dark square bishop, so the dark squares are in the control of white. White can perhaps maneuver the bishop to b2 to a3, and I think it's a very good idea to put the bishop to a3. Knight to e4, bishop to b2, knight to c6, bishop a3, knight to b4. So as I said, the bishop on a3 is very good, but here we have knight to b4, and white decides to capture the knight for the bishop. A b4, bishop to d3, hitting the knight, and here we have knight to f6. There are many players in this position who actually go for f5, and definitely it's a fine move, but I think practically in the lower level it is actually kind of best move, because it opens up the rook, it protects the knight, and like if for example if we take f into e4, and the rook is extremely strong. But the correct way to play in this position is, like, many players actually get afraid and they do not castle short. But actually, guys, you can absolutely go for castling short in this position. And I don't know how can black actually continue the position. For example, if black continue the play by, let's take c5. It's very standard move. Here we can, like, it looks very strong. The structure actually looks very strong, but nothing is happening. You can simply continue your game by playing something like knight e5, followed by f3. You can play rook e1, rook d1. Nothing is happening. And in the worst thing, you can actually capture this knight, and after f takes, you can even play f3, and it's extremely fine position. Right, never get afraid whenever you get this position on this board. You can simply focus on your development part, and nothing is going to happen. Because if black tries to attack, it takes a huge amount of time, which usually black does not have. That's the reason we have knight to f6. Definitely a c3 square also looks very good for black, but it eventually loses a pawn on h7. Knight to f6, defending the pawn, short castle by white, and here we have c5 by black. Definitely trying to open up the position, everything is developed, and yeah. The only difference in this position is white is having this a4 pawn compared to this b4 pawn, or if we keep the pawn to a5, it's a symmetrical position. We have this a4 pawn, b4 pawn, we have the bishop, and except that everything is same. Such an interesting position. c5, we here have some trades in the center, dc5, bc5, and here finally we have e4 by Gukesh, pushing up the pawn. And here there are many players who actually push their pawn to d4, thinking that this pawn is extremely strong. Guys, definitely this pawn looks very extremely strong, but after e5, this pawn is actually hanging. Like, you have to move the knight, and after I can simply capture this pawn, and white is simply a pawn up, having a good position, and white is extremely fine. White can actually put his knight to d3, and white can simply enjoy his position. So here black was kind of forced to capture the pawn on e4. He had to make a trade. If he captures this pawn, bishop into c4, and it's still good for white. I believe after this, c5 pawn is an open target, and it's white, and it's good for white. D into e4, bishop into e4, rook to a7, knight to e5, queen to d6, rook fe1, knight takes. Here you cannot capture the knight because of bishop into h7, and you lose the queen. It's a very cheap threat, but sometimes it works. So knight into e4, queen into e4, rook to d8, queen to f3. White wants to play rook to d1 because now the queen is also covering the square. Queen to c7, rook d1, rook e8, rook a to 8, I would say. We have a rook trade, rook d1, rook c8. And rook c8 was actually a blunder. The best would have been to capture the rook, and after this, h6, and it's a fine position. Like, all those who are thinking the knight is hanging, guys, it's a back mate. So h6, and technically if I go in the deep world of chess, deep knowledge of chess, I would say in the end game, usually when you have the queen end game, the side which is having the knight is actually much better. The reason is quite simple. The compensation with the knight and the queen is much better than the compensation with the bishop and the queen, because you can see the queen can move like a bishop, like diagonally, but the queen cannot move like a knight. The knight is actually a very special piece. That is the reason why knight is actually considered as a special piece. That is one of the reasons I consider knight, usually knights in the end game, because they are very tricky and they actually covers all the 64 square, while bishop covers only 32 squares. That's an fact and you can't change it. And I think this was one of the reasons that Nodirbek didn't like to trade the rooks, and he kept the trade, and he simply moved the rook to c8. And by playing rook c8, you are actually simply giving open file to your opponent, which can be very deadly. And after rook c8, Gukesh played queen to g3. It's also a fine move, but the best way to was to play queen to h5, simply going for this pawn on f7 and also defending the knight to e5. And on the next move, white idea is very simple to play rook to d7, hitting the queen followed by f7 is also hanging and the game is over. So black is forced to play g6, hitting the queen, but after queen g5, queen f6, rook d7, I think it's already over. Black is having no play. Even rook to d8 is not possible because the queen covers it and the game is over. So I think it would have been an extremely powerful move, but queen to g3 by Gukesh. I don't know what was his idea. Perhaps he wanted to play f4, protect this knight, something like that. So h5 was played, h3, rook to d8, asking for a rook trade. We have a rook trade. Gukesh definitely happily traded the rooks because in the end game the queen and the knight coordinates much better than the queen and the bishop. So here we have knight to d3 by white, hitting this pawn on c5. h4, you can't capture the cannot capture the pawn because the queen is hanging. Unless if the queen wasn't protecting the pawn, you still can't capture because the knight was hanging. So this theme of chess is also called deflection. Basically, you're deflecting the queen from protecting the knight, and hence you lose the knight. So he's a grandmaster. He's not going to lose this knight. Queen to e3, hitting this pawn twice, and it's actually over. It's completely winning position for white. Not completely, but majorly it's winning. Like Engine gives it plus 2.5 like that. So it's completely winning. Bishop to b7, f3, queen to d6, king to f1, like flanking, like just simply bringing the king, centralizing the king and stuff like that. He's not going for directly capturing the pawn on c5 because he can go for capturing the pawn c5 anytime he wants. So he's just waiting. e5, and now he went for capturing the pawn. Bishop to c8. Definitely in this position, it looks like black should give a check to white, but guys, nothing is happening. Both the moves are actually winning. King f2 is also fine, completely winning move. And if check, white can play queen e2, and this pawn is protected by the knight, so nothing is happening, and white is completely winning. So at the place of giving checks, black decided to defend, like covering all the squares of the knight. King to e1. Bishop to f9. All those who are wondering why white is bringing the king, the reason is quite simple. As the black queen is having this open d file, white is trying to take the squares of d2 and d1 from the black queen, and definitely white wants to play something like, he can't move the queen because the knight is hanging, but at some point there could be some idea of the queen to d2 trading the queens. So we have bishop to f5, a5, and now Gukesh is like, I'm going to push my pawn. Queen c7, a6. The pawn is defended by the knight. Like it looks completely horrible position for black, and it looks like anytime Nodirbek is going to resign. Bishop to c8, attacking the pawn, and now you can't actually really defend the a6 pawn. So Gukesh gave up the pawn, but in the exchange he grabbed e5 pawn, which is still completely winning because the reason is quite simple. White is the pawn up. White is having the much better coordination in the end game compared to the black because of the knight and the queen and the bishop. It's quite simple, and yeah, it's winning for white. Still very hard because it's the queen end game. Queen to b6, taking this, like you have to look out for these checks. Knight c5, stopping this. Queen a5, king d1, check. King c2, bishop c8, knight e4, bishop to e6, king to b2. King b2 was a blunder by Gukesh. Much better move, and I think the best move could have been to play queen to d6, simply going for a queen to it. Definitely, if black trades the queen, it's already winning. And the most practical move looks to play queen a8, trying to play queen a2. But here king d3. King d3, the reason is quite simple. Like for example, if black comes in trying to attack this pawn, we simply give a check, capture this pawn, and simply play knight to d2 anytime we want, defending the b3 pawn and stopping every check in this position, and it's completely fine position for white. It's completely playable position. For example, if bishop f5 check, king e2, and now there are no more checks. It's completely win. So slowly and steadily you build your position and grab some pawns and you win the endgame. But definitely very complicated. In the game, we have king b2 and queen a8, and you can already sense it. Queen a3 can be a deadly threat. So knight to c5 by Gukesh. Queen a3 checking, move g6. King to c2. If you try to capture this bishop, queen into the b3, and now the game is actually draw. Like if king c1, queen into c4, knight's winning for, and it's still draw. Like if queen b2 is the best and still draw, yeah, you can just sense it. So we have king to c2 defending this pawn. Queen check, queen comes. Bishop check, you can't trade the queens because white is the pawn of having the knight, much better piece in the endgame, and completely winning for white. So bishop f5, knight to e4, queen to a7, king to d3, queen g1. It looks like the game is getting complicated, but yeah, queen to c5. You can't capture this queen with the knight because the knight is pinned. Queen to d2, queen to g1. Couple of moves were played in the end. And yeah, like Gukesh is trying to trade the queens. Queen a2, king move, take, knight g5, check, 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 king to c5. Not a good move in this position. The best move could have been to play queen to e3 in this position, threatening queen to h6 checkmate. And the g5 looks like one of the only moves. After g5, white can now play queen to e1, e8, a very deadly move. Like the idea could be to like move the knight and give a discovered check. It can prove to be very deadly. And actually, there are only two moves for black to keep the game drawish, or else all other moves are winning for white. Like only queen d2 and bishop d7 make the game draws, or else every move loses. Like like all who are wondering how bishop d7 can be a draw, can't white simply capture it, guys? After queen to d2 check, white loses the queen. That is the reason bishop d7 and the queen to d2 are the only checks. You can give a check or you can attack the queen. You can't play something like bishop to g6 because it's a mate. So yeah, but yeah, very deadly. But in the end, Gukesh was actually having extremely in time pressure. And yeah, he decides to move fast. Check. He played king c5, queen takes, queen takes, queen check, takes, and now the game is extremely drawish. I think black is even slightly better, I suppose, perhaps, because white king is very open compared to the black king. Both the sides are having few pawns, but black pawn is much faster. So we have a couple of moves were played. Bishop d7, check, check. So perhaps the game would have been a draw. And after queen g7 on the move number 71, queen was hitting the 9. It's slightly better position for black. White can continue the game by playing queen to d1 check, king move, queen to d6, and the game can be simply continued. It's still very complicated. Perhaps black is having an edge now because of h3 and the pawn is extremely strong, but not such a strong edge. But what happened in the game is, after queen to g7, something unbelievable happened. Knight f3. And what will you play in this position for black? Feel free to pause the video and I try to find the finishing blow made by Nodirbek Abdusattorov. So okay, all those who have came with this move, it's pretty natural. Check. Check. Knight is attacked. The game is over. On the move number 72, Gukesh decides to resign the game and first loss of the chess Olympiad of Gukesh. Yeah, very big upset, I would say. Like in the middle game, it looked like perhaps White can win the game. It looked like when I was watching the game, like I actually watched this game after the game was finished. So when I saw the game, I was like in the middle game, and I was like, how can this guy lose this game? It's completely winning. Like he's having the knight and the queen compared to the bishop and the queen. He's a pawn up, so what more does he require? But in the end, as I like, I won't say that it was something like he simply blended a piece, like he did, but he actually Nodirbek. I have to admit that Nodirbek actually played very well in the end game. He slowly and slowly gave a check to the white king. Keep the position very complicated. Like the reason the game was very complicated because the white king was extremely exposed. So both the sides gave checks to the piece, but eventually, yeah, black actually got white in his trap, and I would say the game was over on the 72nd move. So very interesting game, I would say. The end result of Uzbekistan versus India 2 was a draw with 2-2. On the second and the fourth board, the game went to a draw. In the first board, Nodirbek won with from the team of Uzbekistan. But in the third game, Pragnananda beat Gukesh. A very good match. That was also a very good game. You can actually go and check it out. So yeah, very good game and very crazy game. I definitely like this game. Till the middle game, it was very interesting, yeah, for Gukesh. But after the completion of the middle game, when the end game started, it's all over for Gukesh. So very well played by Nodirbek Abdusattorov. So yeah, this was the game. So I hope that you loved the analysis of the game. If you loved it, then make sure to like the video. If you are new to my channel, then make sure to subscribe to the channel. And I'm going to come up with these interesting videos like this. Analysis of the game. The tournament is still pending and it's going to be very interesting till the end. So I'm going to see you soon. So till then, stay tuned and keep watching One Shot Chess.